Hey guys, welcome back to 123 Chess. We're today going to be doing something very interesting. Tom, would you like to tell our audience what we're going to be doing?
Yeah, we decided that we wanted to kind of recap on the growth that we saw in 2020, and we would review our first game that we went over when starting this channel. Um, we're going to be going over our first game, which was the Danish Gambit, and just kind of like making some comments on what we see now, how we've experienced the growth over the last year, and things that we would have done differently, and just kind of doing a live review.
Sweet. So yeah, we're just going to kind of move through the game and kind of show you what was. I mean, we're going to be thinking a lot differently than we did at the time when we played this. Yeah, let's go ahead and kick this off.
Cool. So I started with an e4 opening, which actually, going by where I've been playing now, this has actually changed from my preference. So I still do really like e4, and I was playing e4 in almost every single game up until about a month ago, if even that. In review and preparation for our tournament that we were putting on, I started to explore the idea of the ready opening, moving the knight out first. And I have come to just love playing that knight opening first. It really changes up the dynamic of the game. And what that's led to a lot is pawn coming out, this pawn coming up. And then we often get something like this, which turns into the London system, which is something else that we've gone over on the channel. But I've come to really enjoy playing more of that line. It's a little bit, it's certainly a much quieter game than what we see here in the game that we played, which was the Danish Gambit. And then Luke responded with e5.
Yeah, and for me, E5 is actually something I don't do as much now. I will still play with it now and then, but a lot of times I've decided that it's, for me personally right now, it's stronger to go either Sicilian C5, or more recently I've started playing around with the Pyrrhic defense. So yeah, for both of us, this is already outside of what we typically do now.
Well, and I want to kind of like elaborate on like why we're doing the moves that we're doing in the beginning of the game, because um, I think at this time, so my if I were to go back to my mindset a year ago when I was playing the Danish Gambit, a lot of it came down to I really liked to be aggressive. I just wanted to be really aggressive. I wanted to be really punchy, and I wanted to do something that was like surprising to my opponent. And not a lot of people play with it. This is very common. I mean, if you go on chess.com and you're a 1200 rating or less, this is going to be 90% of your games if you're playing an e4 opening. But this right here is a little surprising. This starts out as the center game here. And just because this was surprising at those lower levels, that's what I really liked about it. I felt like it kind of caught my opponent off guard. And I was somewhat familiar with the lines of attack. I had studied them a fair amount for the Danish Gambit, which is because this is normally what happens in the center game is it's accepted. But then following it up with this, as opposed to recapturing with queen, this is where you get into the Danish Gambit, offering more material. And something that I've really come to realize, and I'm sure Luke would agree with this assessment, is most people that are more advanced in their chess ratings, right, and their skill. They don't play a lot of gambits at the beginning. Queen's Gambit, but Queen's Gambit isn't a traditional gambit because you recapture the material. But the idea of giving up material so early in the game, it puts you at a pretty big disadvantage. Um, and I think, coming into this, this being our first game, right?
Hmm.
I had come from playing against mostly, I hadn't even been playing online a heck of a lot. Most of my chess playing was sporadic here and there against people who I'd meet in real life that I was like, hey, I play chess, you play chess, let's play together.
Right.
And even though I was probably ranked online somewhere in the ballpark of like, I don't know what it is, I could look it up, but probably around like 1100, 1150, somewhere around there, um, on chess.com. That's still like you're a decent chess player at that kind of a level. And if you're around there and you're like me, you probably in your real life you encounter a lot of people who you can mop the floor with because you actually know some real solid chess principles, right? This is an opening. This is a legitimate opening, even though it's even if it's not played that much. I knew enough to have a plan going into this game of what I was doing, which is a lot more than a lot of people who know the basic moves of chess.
Yeah. And just to kind of piggyback off what you said there, before we continue, and this when I go e5, one of the reasons why I do something like this now is as you move up the ladder of chess ratings, you find that this becomes a much more common move, and it's pretty obvious when you look into it why. Because this is a flank pawn that's attacking, and this is a concept I'll mention a little later, but when you have a flank pawn, meaning not one of the two middle pawns, that's actually covering or attacking one of the center squares, it's really strong. And this is the move one of the game for black, and they're already doing that. So in many variations of the Sicilian, which this is called, black actually ends up with two pawns in the center while white ends up with one. So that could be a long-term advantage for black. Also, the other one that I typically do now, which is the Pyrrhic defense, this actually, I play it mostly because it also has a similar pawn structure to, which is another concept we'll talk about later, is similar to the King's Indian defense if Tom had started with the queen pawn. But the idea is I'm working with this more of a system, right? So it's not so much like an opening, memorize this, and this, but it's a system where if you understand pawn structures, they will guide you throughout the game. And so the problem with E5 is, well, it allows a lot of different types of things. It allows white to just kind of dominate what type of game they want. Or dictate rather. So that means Tom could, if he goes with the most common, which is like the knight, then you get this, and the Scotch game is really aggressive for white. Also, you can go into the if I had moved my knight out here, then his bishop there trying to pin my knight would actually be the Ruy Lopez. So you get a lot of these variations that are really strong for white, and I want to have a little bit more say in what opening comes about. So anyway, I won't digress further, but I just want to make a few comments there.
Yeah. Um, and I think that's the main idea. Is that exactly what Luke is getting into? Is you're trying to help make a statement about like, this is the game that I want to play. I'm not going to let my opponent choose completely what game we're playing. I want to have some say in it. And that kind of has everything to do with the opening. Um, uh, and so we get into this, right? The capture there is pretty common. Um, and then I move into the Danish gambit. And at this point in time, what I'm hoping for, the game that I'm hoping to play, is actually uh, this right here, the Danish gambit accepted. And then we get like this.
Both bishops aimed at my king side with a
Yeah,
non-developed.
this is really what I'm hoping for. Now that being said, you can see, uh, like grandmasters won't play this because this is it's not a great position for black to be in because you are still 2 pawns down. And if black defends properly, black should be able to win this game. One of the things that I liked about it early on was this was a way for me to really practice like attacking. But I think I had a different thought too about what attacking really meant. Because for me in this early in this early development in my chess skills, I was really thinking about attacking in terms of like quickly like getting something out, maintaining that initiative, and really striking. But I've come to realize that it's a little bit more like there's more time and subtlety in your attacks. And I think subtlety is kind of like a key word that is something that really stands out for me in this game because I do see a lot of things that both Luke and I were doing incredibly right, whether accidental or not. I think that there are a lot of things that we can look at and we can say, oh, I'm doing some really good concepts right, but there are things that are just a little off. So Luke advanced his pawn here.
And the reason why I did that is because I wanted to take it outside of what he would think I would do, right? So I'm trying to take us out of normal territory because he wants me to take it. I realized that, or he wouldn't have played it. And if I just guard it, well, then he's got 2 pawns in the center, and then his queen will pop out. If I, let's say I did something like instead of moving there, like I pop my knight there. Well, then take, take, and then boom, now he's got his queen there without a knight to harass it. So that's really bad for me. So when you look at exchanges, you have to look at what it's going to happen after the exchange. And also, if I just if I try to do something like counterplay, it just gets too complicated. Like we're in move, 3? I don't want to have the complication just go through the roof yet. I need to have some kind of clarity to the center. So for me, moving that pawn up just said, okay, well, you want the pawn, you're going to get it, but you're going to have to put your bishop behind the pawn if you want to do that.
Well, and again, I think what we've come to is still talking about these concepts that we're still understanding to this day and really guiding us in our opening philosophy. Is we are talking about I want to play the game that I want to play. I want to have some say in the game that I want to play. I think the idea is as we've progressed, up the ladder, up the ranking ladder, what we've started to realize is like, okay, I want to play the game that I want to play, but there are more solid ways to do that because there are more ways to go wrong. There are more ways to lose control, more ways for things to go awry when you're not playing, in the fashions that we've really played. And the games that we've talked about playing, like these are really solid openings that are played at very high levels. I was looking at it. The ready opening is choice number 3 for opening moves, followed only after e4 and d4.
Yeah.
The ready opening is the next on that list.
And again, guys, the ready opening is this move on move 1 instead of a pawn.
Yep.
They call it a hyper modern opening because it's hyper modern usually is in reference to the fact that you're not directly confronting the center, you're doing it with an indirect way.
Yeah, and I think center control is going to be something that we really do need to hit on quite a bit because I think our understanding of center control was a lot more basic at this point in time than what we have now. Really, like what I'm really striving for in most of my games is I want to have 2 pawns. I want to have 2 pawns here and here, ideally.
Yep.
That's what I'm looking for that center control. Because if I have 2 pawns there, I'm attacking all 4 of those squares.
Mm-hmm.
And so, openings that give you the opportunity to be able to have 2 secure pawns there and maintain that control, because that's another thing, right? Just having 2 pawns there, if you're going to lose them, it's no big deal. Like there's no point in having them there. You want to be able to like put them there and keep them there. And if you just get 1 pawn in the center and it's secure and that's locked in, that's still pretty darn good in terms of center control. But you know, we're talking about things like gaining space, and that's what it is. And like Luke said, pawn structure. And right now, we're not seeing, you know, anything too terribly bad in terms of pawn structure. This pawn here is certainly getting in the way of my knight, because this is a very common square that knight wants to hop out to. Like Luke said, this pawn is definitely in the way of this bishop, which is something that I kind of should be aware of going forward. But, you know, material is even right now. And if I were just looking at the board, I would say, I don't know how you feel, Luke, but I would say like white probably has a little bit of an advantage at this point.
Yeah,
right?
white has, if we look at the different criteria, space, white has much more space on the board. Development, white is still one move, actually two moves ahead, you could argue, in development, because there's a pawn and a bishop out there. And white also has more attacking potential because it's more clear that you want to attack king side with white. And then yeah, so I think, you know, development, space, and attacking potential, in all those ways, I would say white is definitely better.
So going on, Luke brings out his knight, which is good. Getting, you know, getting some action into the center, developing his pieces. Knight development again, great. You know, gaining more play in the middle of the board, right?
Oh, just one thing real quick. Sorry, let me back up for just a second here. So we mentioned how, okay, so at this point, what I would do now, if I was playing this line as black, then and you can read on my blog on chess.com, I put this is what I'd play instead, because it's a counterplay move hitting this pawn. And then, you know, the idea is you have the knight that can come out. If the queen comes out, you have your queen that could come out. So this is, if I was playing this line as black, this is what I would play instead of moving it up or taking. So anyway.
Well, and again, to reference pawn structures, right? So if this pawn comes out, you know, my options here are pretty limited, right? So if I take, right? Well, look at my pawn structure. That's created an isolated pawn for myself, right?
Which we say that can be a target for me, an easy target.
Yeah, because it doesn't have anything. There's no pawn that's easily defending this, and so that's going to be attacked pretty relentlessly. I want to say, Luke, correct me if I'm wrong. No, I want to say that, I don't know. Is this the line?
Yeah, I mean,
don't know.
That's certainly one way you can approach. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can approach it. But
I honestly would say, like, just looking at it now, you know, and I'm never going to encounter this in a real game anymore because I never play this line anymore, right? But I almost want to say, just intuitively, I would want to do this.
Yeah.
Just to give a reasoning behind that is, you know, I have preserved this pawn structure. At least his, you know, if he wants to wreck my pawn structure now, right? At least if he wrecks my pawn structure now, at least, like, there are no pieces on the board with the exception of that isolated pawn, which are now in the middle, in the middle of controlling everything. But
yeah,
I don't like this. I don't like this either, because I still have that isolated pawn, and that's kind of the result of this whole exchange. Is now I get an isolated pawn, and again, this is kind of one of those reasons why this opening is a weak opening, because yeah, you're going to trick your opponents. You're going to trick a lot of people. And at lower levels, you're going to get people who fall right for that. And they're going to do that line that I said I was hoping Luke played, right? Because they're like, oh, free pawn, free pawn, free pawn. I'm going to gobble it up. And then all of a sudden you got this really strong attack going. And, you know, you can just bash down on the king's side really fast and get some quick wins in. And that feels good. But if you want to climb the ranking ladder, what you're going to encounter is you're going to encounter people that say, like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to play that game that you want to play. I know, I've seen this before. I know what to do. and I'm going to respond with something like that. And now I've created an isolated pawn for you, and I've shut down your plans. And what do you really have to show for it?
Exactly.
Um, so we get here, again, continuing with development.
It's funny because I don't bring the bishop to c5 much anymore, even when I play e5.
That's funny. That is funny.
I just, that's not a spot I bring it because it gets harassed easier.
I still bring it out to c5 quite a bit. I like c5 for bishops. But castle's good, right? And again, like that's what I want to hit on is like we are playing some solid moves, right? These are like that's not a bad move. Moving d6, right? You're still that opening principle, right? He's maintaining some control of the center. He's trying to grab some space there. He's activating this bishop. All of these are good things. This is the first move in the game that I just look at and I'm like, ooh, really? I would never do that anymore. And I couldn't even tell you why I did this move in the game, other than maybe to say like
to open up your rook.
Yeah, well, yes, and that's what it was. It was okay. If he takes, I can recapture, and I open up this file for my rook, which generates this attack. But pawn structure.
Yes.
Pawn structure is what's really the principle that I'm violating here, because if Luke captures and I recapture, okay, yeah, I've unleashed the power of this rook, which seems pretty cool, but that's honestly going to be shut down. Like there's not going to be a strong attack that develops there once the castle happens.
And you've at that point gotten rid of the dark square bishop if you did that, and that's the piece that can pin the knight to my queen and stuff like that. So
yeah,
so there
absolutely.
and it's not just that those would be doubled pawns, but if I take, they're not just doubled pawns, they're doubled isolated pawns, meaning they're not connected with, there's no potential for them to be undoubled in the future. Yeah. So if it was over here, on the these squares where the bishop is, those two, then eventually they could work in tandem with this one to potentially take more of the center. They might not even be a weakness, but yeah, isolated and doubled, not too great at the beginning.
Yes, I think that's totally fair. One of the things that we said a lot at the beginning was focusing on doubled pawns too much, because there are places like here, right, where you'll end up getting a doubled pawn on the B file or on the G file, but that frees up your rook without moving it, right? So it's not freeing up this rook, because in addition, like this weakens the square around that defense around my king, right? And opens up those lines as well by getting rid of that pawn. So there are times where having those doubled pawns isn't horrible, but this is one of those occasions where, yeah, you've got the double isolated pawns, you've weakened your king side, you don't want those. And so the very obvious move from my perspective now, from our perspective now, would be Luke captures that bishop, which I'm sure he would do 100% of the time now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, so what if I'd be, I mean, like it's just, there's no reason not to. There's no reason not to.
Interestingly, Luke backs away in the game.
Which I mean, one thing I was scared that if you took me on this square, because then my pawn structure would be ruined. So that was a well-founded thought that I had, but I just, instead of moving there, I should have just taken.
Well, and like what we talked about in terms of if you're going to be doubling up pawns, right? That's how you want to double up pawns is have it come from here, open up that line of attack with that rook.
Right.
And you're taking toward the middle. Taking toward the center is always better too. And so that's yeah, in terms of a better place for me to capture, that's certainly a better spot from your perspective. I don't capture, and really for a series of moves here, every single move I should be capturing this bishop, just simply because I don't want him to capture me.
Yeah.
And that's the basic idea. I mean, I could get it out of the way too.
But that's kind of awkward because I haven't moved my knight yet.
Yeah, and now we're talking about me moving a piece twice, right? This is the opening game, and you generally want to move your pieces each piece one time.
Which
And
reminds me of what I just did. Now I moved my bishop twice, so now look at the development. 1, 2, 3, 4 versus 1, 2. Now I'm 2 behind.
yeah, so knight comes out. Good development, preparing to castle. And then I do this, and
Yeah, I'm not sure what the.
so I think back at this time, moving a pawn out like this. I think my logic behind it was like, oh, it's usually a good spot to like tuck a bishop, right? If I advance it up and it gets attacked or something like that, it gives me a retreat square. But retreat from what? Right? So I don't have any sort of a plan with this bishop. I don't have this grand plan. And what's the threat, right? He's got his bishop here, so I'm not going to even be harassed by this knight if I come up onto this square by a pawn. What, he's going to move that forward? That's not a real threat there. So
And you already had a pawn if you were trying to prevent, because that's common to prevent a knight hop, but you already have this pawn that's watching over this square. So,
exactly.
there's no knight hop that could happen anyway.
So this is just kind of like one of those moves, and it's funny, once upon a time, Ashley was hearing me. Ashley's my wife. She'd hear me say, "Ugh," like, "Ugh, I'm such an idiot" while I was playing. I still do that to this day. But about a year ago, most of those occurrences were I just left a piece hanging and somebody took it, right? I just left my bishop hanging for no reason. Now, this is the kind of thing that I go over because I do something, I do an innocuous move. I do something and I'm just like, oh, I just wasted a tempo. Like, why did I do that? Yeah, because it didn't really accomplish anything.
So we're even now in this game because I wasted my bishop twice move, and now you wasted a move with the pawn. So there you go.
Yeah. So we get to capitalize on that a bit. And,
I have no qualms about that move.
Yep. Then I do this, and the idea behind it, I think, is okay. The idea is, I wanted to get my knight or my queen aligned with my bishop to have this attack that I'm preparing to do on the king side. But if you look at the board as it is, like, there's a pretty big thing that's preventing that attack from being successful right now, and that's this pawn. That pawn is in my way, and I can say all I want. Well, all I have to do is advance it one square, right? But again, I'm counting on Luke not recognizing my plan, and he does.
And that kind of move too, it's like like you said, it telegraphs what you're doing. Like in chess, like as we've continued to move up the ladder, we've recognized that the more obvious moves you make don't work anymore when they used to, because the players are stronger that we're playing against now. We're stronger, and so we have to do moves that are more subtle or that have different things that open up that aren't so obvious for our opponent what our plan is.
Yeah, because this is the kind of thing that would absolutely work against, 99% of my friends that I just meet in my daily life that casually play chess sometimes or basically know the moves. Because I'm going to do something like this, and they're going to do something like shoot, they're going to do something like this for no real reason. And I don't know why, but that's the kind of move that I'm going to see. And then I'm going to be like, oh, I'm great. And they're going to be like, oh, I can take that pawn. And then I go, oh, wow, look at what I just did. And yeah, like I can do that, and I can clean up games against people who have no idea and are just going to let me get away with anything that I want. But, people who know how to play chess aren't going to get away with that. And so this doesn't significantly improve my position. And it's funny. So I haven't looked at this in a long time, and just kind of thinking like what I would do from this position. Um, I kind of want to say, well, here's the obvious one.
Yeah, I know. Like the whole game, like until those bishops come off the board, like the engine. I remember when we reviewed this, kept wanting each of us to take each other's bishop
Yes,
constantly.
yes. I do think that I would be pretty secure with this move right here.
Hmm.
Because like I said about having those two pawns in the middle, right? So now if Luke were to take, well, now I can recapture with that pawn.
Yeah, I would definitely like I might have before, but I definitely wouldn't now because I knew that he'd have the strong. I mean, he's dominating the center now.
Yeah.
So probably okay. So if you went there, I'd probably do one of two things. Well, first of all, I know that that's probably with the intention of this kind of thing to
Yeah.
expand, right? So that's pretty devastating. So there's a few candidate moves I would have. Number one, I could plop my knight over here. So now I'm creating a threat. Number two, I could plop this knight over here. So now I'm creating a threat on this guy. Number three, I could just do a simple move the bishop here. So that way it's covering all directions. This is something that we've talked about before, but when you have a bishop that, well, let me just move it. So when you have a bishop that is 3 squares away from, 1, 2, 3 squares away from the knight, then it covers both directions. Now, obviously it doesn't cover this square right here, right now, but the point is that would, something like that. Or if I moved right here, either one of those moves would be with the intention of kind of trying to create counterplay. But I feel like probably this one or this one might be two of the biggest options.
Yeah. And the other thing that I like about moving that up too is that frees up more play for my queen as well, right? It allows, an additional move for this knight to activate further. Again, like what we're talking about isn't this like, I've got a sneaky attack that I'm about to do, right? It's not this like, ooh, maybe he won't see it. Instead, it's I'm trying to maximize the value of my pieces.
Yes.
And to maximize the value of my pieces, they need to have more options in terms of where they can go and what they can do. And this is the kind of move, right? I am going towards the center. That knight is becoming a little bit more activated. I took care of that problem that I had with my bishop, that if he captured would double up my pawns. I opened up this square, which allows me to advance this pawn, which previously was stuck behind that knight. And like I said, I opened up this diagonal for my queen to go down. And so that one single move does a lot of things for me. It makes it so I can recapture if he goes here, and now I've got more pieces in the center. And it's all of those things that I'm really looking at that are saying like, oh, that seems like that's a decent move. That's a legitimate move.
And now that I look at this more, I would definitely do this knight hop, because the idea is you have 1, 2 pieces protecting this knight, and then you're either going to lose the bishop, which is what I want, so I'll have the bishop here, or anyway, I won't go into that further, but that's kind of what I would definitely do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, and were that to happen, we'd probably see something like, I don't know, a rook coming over to defend, or the queen coming up again to defend it, right? To get another defense in.
Exactly.
But that's again, like it's intentional, right? And so this becomes that focus, right? So the focus is like, okay, I took care of my bishop problem, and then Luke is saying like, okay, well, I'm going to create a new bishop problem for you, right? And so now I have to take care of that, and that's kind of where the dynamic goes, is recognizing where that problem is, and then going after it. Because the funny thing, that's not, if I did nothing there, right, and I just did another wasted move, right? Yeah, the obvious move for Luke at this point is taking.
Right? And you can't take, well, actually, you can take my knight still. I would,
Yeah, and if you look at material, we're considered even in material, but this is not good.
Yeah.
That's not good for white. I just blew through my pawn structure, and I lost my bishop pair now.
And you could
Um,
have also, just as another idea, if I took here, you could also start by what we call a Zwischenzug, or intermezzo move, because I'm attacking your queen and you're attacking my queen. So this is a little more complex, but this is more of a line that we didn't used to play, but we could play now because of our, how much we've improved. And so now, Tom, what would you do from here?
oh, this seems awful to me, Luke, because
Hmm.
I would do this, and then after the recapture,
Hmm.
I would do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because now the check is happening. So I mean, even from here, what do you do? So
It's hard. It's hard.
something like this, and now you're really down material.
Yeah. So that for black, that would have been a little trick that would have probably been even better. And it's all a matter of, it's all, again, this is something I'll come back to, but who has the greatest threat on the board? That's what dictates the flow of the game. And I've said this, since if you read my blog, and we've said in our videos so many times, that's the takeaway for me, is whoever has the greatest threat in the board, you are the one who is owning the game.
Absolutely. Oops. Went way too far there. All right. So this is where we were.
Yep. So now I hop in here, and this was pretty obvious why. I'm hopping in there because I want to plug up that, I want to make sure this pawn stays there. But when we reviewed this, I discovered that, well, it's actually not super strong, because now Tom can first of all, this should happen. But then if I take it, then he goes here, and all of a sudden it's opened up. So now he's going to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. Either he's going to get a free pawn, or it's going to get into a line where now all of a sudden this rook comes over and I'm in trouble. And so that's why that move I did was premature, because I mean, look at who's controlling this square. Me. How many pieces do I have that are defending it? 1, 2. How many pieces does he have that are defending it? 1. So therefore, there's no need to do that. There's no need to hurry. I can just do a simple move like this or this, and I'd be totally fine. So
Yeah. But I do about the worst thing possible, which is just capturing it, right? Well, I mean, I guess to be fair, that allows me to
take the bishop
advance.
next.
Yeah. And I do this. This was my last opportunity to take that bishop.
Yep.
Last opportunity to take the bishop, and I didn't. I moved away.
And then I finally do it. I finally take that stinking bishop.
I'm gonna take it now. Yeah. It's so funny because I had this I moved. And that was the thing, is I recognized this as being a strong move, which is why I moved my king, because I was like, well, I can't do this move with this bishop bearing down on me, right? But if I can't do that move with that bishop bearing down on me, just take the stupid bishop, right? If I had done that and then that,
then you would have given me double pawns too, as a bonus.
We could have done that, and that looks a heck of a lot better for white.
Yeah.
Yep. So instead I do this, we get to that doubled, and now these pawns are a real problem for me. This is a real big problem for me. And yeah, this game, this here looks like a tragically lost position now to me for white.
But as we mentioned when we played this, I could not figure out what to do from here. I was so focused on this stupid knight attacking this pawn that I missed the most obvious thing ever. The fact that these 3 pieces, actually all these pieces, are stuck over on the queen side. Who's on the king side to defend his king? And there's 2 pawns as a blockade to help me out here. What I could have done is this. That is so strong. It's guarding this pawn, And it's tempting Tom to go here, because if Tom goes here, now all of a sudden my queen's involved, and now he's weakened his king side completely. And then if he does something careless with his knight, I mean, there's forking options, like with my knight here. I could be the one to blast this open. I mean, there's just so
Yeah.
much going for me, and it's all because I didn't get tunnel vision focus as I did in the game and see that, like, oh man, I gotta like maneuver this queen here. I mean, not the queen, but like, either take his knight or do something else, like move this piece back. And in the game, I did that. I moved the piece back, which that guards it too. But compared to moving here, not even close to as good.
Yeah.
So passive.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's that nail on the head. Passive. It's a passive move. And so I do this. And this was with the intention, I think, of I wanted to get these pawns in.
Yeah.
Recognizing that the queen side is the only spot that I have an attack going for me at this point. This happens, attacking the bishop, which is, I don't know, it's kind of humorous because like because that bishop is doing nothing.
I know. It's like saying, hey, bishop,
all.
would you like to move to a better spot? I'm giving you a free opportunity.
Yes, in fact, I would like to move to a better spot. And this is this is something that I think about a lot in all of the moves that I do now, is like, if I'm putting this there, the idea is if he recaptures, now I move up there with my knight, and my knight has improved its position. I've gained the tempo, right? The material is pretty similar. We've both exchanged bishops, right? The bishops just disappeared off the board, but my position improved. Luke just lost a bishop. And so that was a solid choice there in terms of the move. This happens, and then I trade off bishops. Luke recaptures with the queen.
And now I don't have any potential king side attack like I did, because I my knight is not where it should be. It's out there in the lonely range, and just not there's no
and
hope.
He had, and you had the advantage, right? So we go back here and we say like, boom, clear advantage, Luke.
Yep.
But if you have the clear advantage,
you have to convert it to a winning position.
You do, and when you're tied in material, if you have an advantage because of the position on the board, that's when you don't want to be trading off a bunch of material. If you're trading off a bunch of material at this point in time, you're going to equal out the position, because the advantage is not the material. The advantage is the position. And so it's to my advantage at this point to trade off a bunch of material, which ends up being what happens with here and here. Again, just focusing on that pawn.
And now your knight has become a lot stronger.
I don't know. I mean, the knight moving to that side of the board, I think, becomes a waste, right? I mean,
yeah, kind of.
I mean, like all of my pieces are really focused on a queen side attack at this point in time. And what am I going to really do for developing a king side attack? I don't have much on that side to do. I think this position, if I could have gotten it there, would have been stronger with my knight.
Yeah,
but I think at this point in time, what I really need to do is I really need to be pushing.
Yeah, just start pushing all those pawns up, moving them all up the queen side.
Yep, gaining some space. But instead, we go into this little dance here. We're both trying to take over the D file, which makes sense. Open file, get your rook in it. And then I say, oh, I finally make that move. Right?
And I hated this move. This was such but it was so like, man, I should have seen that coming. That was like, I should have seen it a mile away.
Yeah, I mean, that's something with knights, with minor pieces that like you kind of like focus on in general, is if your minor pieces are moving up the board, you've got to expect that they're going to be harassed by pawns. What's your plan for that piece being harassed by pawns? always be asking yourself that question, because if you're not, you're going to get minor pieces that get trapped. They get captured by a pawn because they don't have a retreat square. You know, if all things were equal and we're able to just shove that knight down one more square, that becomes a powerful knight, right? That becomes a powerful knight because I have no pawns that are able to harass it anymore. And you want to make it even stronger, stick a pawn behind it, because now if I have a pawn behind it, I've got it defended pretty securely.
Yeah. You know what's interesting here, Tom, is I didn't see this in our game, but now I'm looking and I kind of like this.
Yeah, I like that too. I like that a lot.
The evaluation says white is better, but at the same time, that kind of counterplay is something I wouldn't have seen, you know, a year ago when we played this game. Because it, looks scary. It looks scary.
It does look scary. But you know, with the recapture, like we said, now Luke's not retreating that position either. Though, looking here too, the one thing that you have to be a little conscious of,
it'll get trapped.
It is a little trapped because all of these squares are currently threatened right now.
So if we were to play this position, you know, you'd probably do something like trying to get your rooks, like probably move this rook over. No, you can't do that because I'd take the other one. But I mean, because if you do something like this first, then all of a sudden I have a fork. So then you take here, and now I'm the one with.
That's true.
With the rook. So anyway, some just random thoughts.
Yeah,
but I kind of like that idea.
I do. I like that idea. I mean, I think that has potential. I certainly think that it's
better than what I did.
Better than this.
That is the worst place for that knight. Like, it is going nowhere.
Yeah.
It's a pawn at this point.
What's funny is this knight was supposed to be like way over here, and
I know it was supposed to be on a king side attack, and it's on a queen side deadening.
So now we get into this.
We're each scared to take.
They want to take. We're just gonna try to double up. And here, this this knight is like, I'm gonna attack king side. I've got this attack going. Hi, you didn't see me. And then, okay, what are you going to do now, knight? Nothing.
I know.
It's nothing at all.
It's hilarious.
And so I just feebly believe that. Now
I mean, you did weaken my pawns around my king a little bit.
Weakened the pawns around the king. But I gave up a tempo to do it.
You did, yeah.
And so he gets to double up those rooks first, and why not? We'll all just
we used to do that all the time, Tom. Do you remember? Like a lot of the games we've played on our channel, even we end up with all these doubled rooks.
Doubled rooks. Take, which that's I don't know. What do you think about the take now?
What do I think about the take now? Yeah. I like. Wait, who does?
You initiate the capture.
Yeah, I hate it. I should not have been the one to take it because I'd rather have a stronger center. And so if what we're talking about here is if I did something else, if he takes, let's just do a dumb move here. I'm not going to do that, but let's say Tom goes first. Okay, well now I just made a way for my knight. I just further protected this pawn. I have a stronger center now. It is a little bit of a target because it's a backward pawn, but I don't really feel like that's too bad. I think that it actually does more good for me than harm. So yeah, I mean, like I don't like that I initiated the attack. I think a lot of times in exchanges now, okay, you guys don't think that this is always the case, but as a general principle, we've found that if you're the one that starts the exchange, unless you have a real strong attack going, usually you're the one in the disadvantage if you're the one that starts the exchange off of pieces, because that means that you're the one that's kind of forced into that corner.
You know what move I kind of like is this right here.
Yes, that's a really good one too.
Because you don't need that pawn to defend this rook at this point, right? If I begin the exchange and we just start trading off a bunch of pieces, you end up with your queen in the middle of the board.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need the pawn for recapturing, and now you've freed up this square to bring the knight in. And something I had a really hard time with understanding for knights is looking like 3 moves ahead with the
Yeah,
knight.
you have to. That's the reality with knights. If you don't see like where does it want to go, like okay, I can hop there, there, there. How do I
Yeah.
get there? You know what I find, Tom? Do you do this? What I do now is I reverse engineer it. So I'm like, what score do I want to go to? Okay,
Yeah.
I gotta go, and then I go back to this one, and then back to where I start. Okay, that's my
Yes.
path.
Yeah. I'd say I'm just going to pick up my knight and I'm going to plop it somewhere on the board. Where do I want that knight to be? How quick can I get it there?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But if you do something like this, you're looking at something like this, and then it's like, okay, well, what are my options from there? I can't move here, right? That square is protected, but this one isn't. And is that square any good to hop to? Well, heck yeah, that seems like a great square for that knight to be on, because now it's threatening this pawn, right?
And
And
if the exchanges happen and then my queen ends up here, then this knight can actually go here, which is really juicy. So
yeah,
because then if potentially, you know, I could even start moving up my pawns and get aggressive and go trade off the knights. I mean, who knows? There's
well,
other
and this,
options.
yeah, this queen's got options too, right? The queen could pop up here, it could come down here, and that all of those things free up spaces for this queen,
Mm-hmm.
or for this knight. So moving there gives you a lot of options. Again, it's the options. It's being able to take care of those options. The recapture is obvious at that point in time.
I think when you see that I didn't take, you know, I took the first piece, but not the second. I think I realized, oh man, maybe I should not have initiated that. Like I kind of get to this point, and I'm like, wait, I didn't really want to do that.
And then I finally realized, like, okay, this knight over here was doing nothing. I've got to bring it back over into the mix on the queen side of things. Pop out. And then I do the exchange, which that seems bad too. For the same reasons that we discussed, right?
Yeah, you usually don't want to be the one that initiates it.
And now I give him control of that open file. Though I do challenge it with this, and I use this strange pawn structure to my advantage, because
Mm-hmm.
you know, these are not viable squares for him to go to. Um, though, you know, if we go back to when I did the exchange, I could have done that here, right?
Oh yeah.
And that seems much better. You know, assuming he didn't take it like he did. What was the move that you did? You bounced your knight back. So assuming he did the same thing, which I don't know that he would, but if instead of capturing with the rook, I went here and we went back there and I went there, well, geez, that seems a heck of a lot better. So now he's got to like bounce back here for the protection, so that way he can get his knight out. But again, like, I'm not going to take it now, right? But this again seems to give me just a better structure in general. And now I think what I'm I don't know. There's so much here that I'm thinking of. Because part of me wants to put my queen here, which I know would initiate the trade, but you know, the possibility of popping up there, but that would leave my
Your
rook
knight would be,
undefended.
yeah.
Yeah, so maybe I would have to take first. I don't know. That seems like a lot. But you know, I mean, I think general principle too is just slowly advancing up the board. So how about
It is a hard position to really be productive as white.
I want to, I would love to be able to put my rook here, but you've got that threatening there. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. At this point in time, maybe exchanging the rook might be the way to go, and then get my queen here to get an attack going.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, at that point, I think it is kind of inevitable. So we get to this point, and then I plot my knight back. You start taking up more space. And now I recognize that really bad threat, this diagonal was opened up toward my king, so that was certainly a danger. But now he's owning the column, the file, so that's another problem because right here is check.
Yeah, this, again, this starts to feel pretty good for me here. But then we get here, and once again, I just make the exchange.
I know, and I that was one of our big moments. Do you remember? That was one of
Yeah.
the big in the game when we looked over it. That was where we recognized, oh man, you had a clear advantage, but then you lost it.
Yeah, because this move would have been great. Like that's gave me the tempo. And I think the hard thing for me to see there was like, oh well, I'm giving up this file. And that's kind of true. I'm giving up the file, but it's with kind of an intention, right? To formulate some sort of dynamic attack.
And
Uh,
if you were to, let's say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, I was going to say because this happens here, and now I can plop in here.
Yep, that's so much better.
And now I can say, like, I want you to initiate that trade, right? I want you to initiate the trade. And again, like, you initiate the trade. No, you initiate the trade. No, you do it. You do it. You take my piece. I want you to take my piece, because if he takes my piece here, boom, I just solved that huge problem that I had.
You almost have a passed pawn too.
Yeah, and that seems great. And if I get here and we get something like this threatening, right? I can move up here, right? And that does create a pass pawn. That might be a little difficult to protect.
But, yeah, I was gonna say I might take that one. That might be tasty.
Yeah, that might be tasty. But either way, that's certainly a much better idea.
I think it's hard to see too, because that move, if you were concerned about me giving a back rank mate, for instance, it's hard to see, but that's a tempo. That's with tempo because it gave me check. Plus, it also allowed you to plop your knight here if you want. Now, this square and this square are both covered by your knight and queen respectively. So no tricks. I can't move my queen anywhere forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just sorry, I'm stuck on this sort of thing here.
What would be? I would definitely do that. I'll tell you that much. I'm gonna definitely do that.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like the way to go. I mean, I guess at this point in time, capturing the queen might be inevitable.
I think so. But if you do that, like if we see that, I think that's what the engine had showed. I think we went over this a little bit, but look, where does my knight go? You have way more space. Yes, you have double pawns, but I think you could make the argument that white actually has a little more of the initiative here, because it's just a little bit like with so much more space, it feels like you have more options. I'm really cramped.
And so we get into something similar to that, because instead I just initiate the trade. The only difference is this pawn wasn't forward, right? I popped my knight in there, and my thought was I was going to be twirling it around and trying to attack these pawns back here by landing here first. Luke starts on the king side here, and I did that, which...
That's another thing. Yeah. So that right there shows something that we've gotten better on. So, well, actually, no, that's not too bad, because
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was good, because you had double pawns. Now you just made it great. Your doubled pawn now has been traded for a non-double pawn, and you're fine with that.
Yeah. So we get here, and then doing the thing that we should be doing, which is getting the kings into the mix, because now they're the powerhouses.
I should have gotten my king in there first. I should have marched my way, instead of moving my knight first, I should have gone boom, boom.
Yeah.
And then tried to get over here. But
yeah. So we're trying to get the kings in the mix is what we should be doing. I don't mind that, having the pawns lined up. That tends to be a common theme in the end games. We get here.
I offered the trade, didn't I?
Yep. And you offer the trade, which I accept. And I'm not sure that I had many other options at this point in time other than to accept. Because I mean, I had this pawn hanging over here.
Yeah, it was a tough one for sure.
But here,
this was a funny moment because I remember it like it was yesterday. I was like, oh, I was like, this is opposition, you know, when the kings are staring at each other. But the problem is it's not as if there were no pawns on the board. This doesn't really help me because I have to be productive here. And how do I advance my pawns?
I think you do have the opposition.
I do, but
Yep.
it's a matter of converting it into like actually using it to my advantage. So what did you do next? So you went.
Well, I did
there.
that. So I started by moving my king.
Mhm.
The thing is as soon as I moved my king, that gave you an advantage, right?
Yeah, I should have moved here.
Should have moved there. What did you do?
What did I do? Okay, so you guys, this is a huge takeaway. Like,
Yeah.
this is something we would never do now. Like, right, Tom? I mean,
Right.
can I, like, neither of us would do this now. I just wasted a pawn move. Now, this is something we did go over. This was actually one of my biggest takeaways from this game one, is that when you have moves to use, those can be used for Zugzwang positions. And
which I would have been in, right? If I mean, effectively, like let's say if my king had started here, right?
Right.
If my king had started here, well, I want to move my king back here. So
right.
I get it on here. Well, now that move seems like really good.
Yes.
Because now he does it. And now because he has the opposition, now I have to move over there. And now he can initiate this.
So I'm going to call it Zugzwang Reserve. No one else, I don't think, in the chess universe has called it that. You got, when you're in an end game with kings and pawns, especially if you have a Zugzwang, which again, Zugzwang is when you have to move, but you want to not move because by moving you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. So if you have a Zugzwang Reserve, well, now you have a move to use, so you can burn up that move to get what you want. So
I moved there.
Yeah. What I should have done is gone instead of moved. Yeah. I just burned up my Zugzwang Reserve all right there. It was so dumb. Like,
and now we get to here, which is, you know, moving us to this in this sort of position. Which I think still here, if I remember from our analysis.
I'm still okay.
You're still okay. I think you still have it.
So from here, what I would do is I would go right here first, I think.
No, that can't be right. Because once I take, then I can march, right?
Well, let's try it. And now I'm going to go here. Oh, stink. Okay, obviously I didn't think enough time. But no, I think the right move was like was going, it might have been even
what you check me, right?
Huh?
What if you check me with your pawn?
Yeah, that's right. Because now if you take this, then I'm going to take your pawn. Yeah, that's right. So then I'd go here, which is super weird looking, but yeah, that is exactly what we should have done. So
yeah, because I'm gonna be in trouble here because I'm gonna have to move my king away from those pawns, and this is Zugzwang now.
Yeah, this is actually, honestly, out of all of our 11 games we went over on our YouTube channel, this is one of the hardest king pawn end games, I feel.
Yeah, because okay, so just to elaborate on this being Zugzwang, right? I need this king to protect this pawn, or I need to take this pawn, but I can't take this pawn as long as this pawn's around, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as I take that pawn, well, he captures that pawn and protects this pawn both at the same time.
So the idea is I'll be connected with it and I can help it all the way up the board.
So I can say, okay, well, let's get another pawn into the mix.
So we could do
But-
that.
Yep.
So yes, and then well, what am I gonna do? I'm probably just gonna take it.
Yep.
Oh no, oops, not that one. I'll take it with this one.
Yeah, because we're in trouble here because now what? So I take.
Now
I
you're
have
really in
to.
trouble.
Yeah, now which one do I want? Right? I can get that one or I can get that one. But either way, whatever one I get, the other one's going to become a queen.
Right. Yeah, this is honestly really dicey end game here. So
So instead we did this. And so Luke, instead of going for that, is like, okay, well, let's rush. Let's race. I'm gonna gobble up these pawns.
Yeah,
and
after
I'm
2
hoping-
moves.
Yep. I'm hoping that me gobbling up these pawns will be faster than you advancing these pawns. Right?
Yeah. But after I moved there, I knew that it wouldn't be fast enough. I just knew it.
So we do this, this, this.
And boy,
And
am I
now that
in
I
trouble.
took away that pawn, now he gets closer to the pawn moving in.
Good grief.
And I take that pawn, which looking at it now, that seems bad. Like I shouldn't have taken that pawn.
Yeah, you should have just rolled your other pawns up.
Should have just rolled it up because that's what I was trying to do anyway.
Yeah, you would have gotten there one move faster than you did.
One move faster. So
oh, look, I got my first pawn. Now I have to move out of the way.
Now my pawn's free.
And
Second pawn. And now I get to move up and I beat him to the advancing.
Okay, but yeah, once we get there, I gotta clear. Okay, so right here. Okay, if you're black, you gotta look out for this diagonal, right? So he's gonna get a queen here, and then he's gonna have an eye on this diagonal. So what I should have done instead of I literally just like I think I went here, right? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
It's so bad. Like instead of doing that, what I should have done is something like move my king up. So I'm gonna get in check, but then I can already have my king to protect my pawn that moves, right? That's what I should have done. But yeah, anyway.
This happens.
With the opposite way. Like, oh, that was so bad. Like,
but at this point in time, game should be over. White has won. Okay.
mm-hmm.
And this was one of my big takeaways because White did not win. So I come down here.
You did, yeah. That's exactly what you should do.
Okay, yeah. This happens. That's understandable. Check. That's okay. But I'm really trying to figure out what to do here. I don't understand this move.
Why I moved it?
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you why. I was gonna go here, and then if take, check.
Oh yeah.
And then you'd have to move your king out of there, and
which is what happens, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what happens.
It worked.
It worked.
Except for then you could just jam your queen right on c4, but
which I do, and I'm like, this should have been it. This should have been game over. That's exactly where my queen needed to go. I had it, and then this happens, and I'm like, okay, well, I need to get my king into the mix, and I had that plan.
Yeah, how did this happen?
And then right here,
you should have taken the pawn.
So taking. So this is the matter of taking, and I think what ends up happening is I take with my queen. Yeah, okay. That's what happens. So right here, why would I take with my queen, right? I'm trying to get my king into the mix. Well, that seems like that's getting my king into the mix, right? What's going to happen now?
Checkmate.
Like what options are available to him? So you can move this pawn down, and now I take it, and I'm going to win.
Well,
right?
no, or you could just do checkmate. No matter what I do.
Oh yeah.
No matter what, there's literally nothing I can do. It's checkmate no matter what.
It's checkmate no matter what. You're right. Yeah, there's nope. There you have 0 outs. That's checkmate. That's one move away. Yeah, but
goodness.
instead I took my queen.
Which you're still okay here.
I'm still okay. Like this absolutely should win.
I mean, yeah, it's
this is a pawn versus a queen. If you can't win with a pawn versus a queen, go back,
Yep.
do some studying, study
And
some
okay,
endgames.
if you don't study, if you guys don't study anything else, if you had watched our first video or looked at my first blog, like what is your goal? Like just let's simplify everything. Take out all the nuances. One goal for white here. If you can't take the pawn right now, then jam your queen in a square in front of the pawn.
Yeah.
Just jam your queen in a square, doesn't matter which one, in front of the pawn. When in doubt, if you're in time trouble or whatever, and then you'll be able to march your king to where you want him to, and then take that pawn. That's all you have to remember.
Because a king can never capture a queen. Just can't happen. Can't happen. King moves one square at a time, and every single square around the queen is protected. So if I just did this,
So you're doing
that.
You're getting ready to jam it in front.
Oh, I mean, I would be if I did that, right? That's what I should have done.
Okay, there you go. Now move your king.
I didn't do that though.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
instead I did this,
which helps
Instead
my
I
king
did
get
this.
further up the board.
Yeah, which was like, well, now he can't move his pawn up. Yeah, he can't move his pawn up, but you know what? He can't move his king. Guys, game's still not over yet. I still have this 100% in the bag. White is winning this game because I mean now, like, I mean, again, I've got the option. I mean, I just want to get down there, right? I've got to get in front of the king. I'm thinking fastest way to do this right now. I don't know, maybe
I would, the easiest way for me no, because then the king would move up one again. I think
move
what I
to
would
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
What I would do is move the queen here first. If you move the
here.
queen here first, because now you cut off the king, and then once this pawn moves, now you can jam
You're
the
right.
queen
Now
in there.
you're jamming in there. Yeah, you're right. So okay, I got to get my king into this mix, right? I have that foresight. Okay, but that pawn is racing. That pawn's going faster. No worry, guys. White still 100% has this. Now I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna get that queen up there, but moving that king up. All right, keeping you in check. Oh, move the pawn up. Is he gonna get it to queen? You know what? No worries. White still has the win here. All right, making the king move, limiting the king squares, making the king move.
Yep.
Got to move in front of the pawn. Boom.
Now white totally has a win here.
White totally has the win. Got to move my king into the mix. Get him up there so I can take that pawn and protect my queen. That's the right idea. This happens.
Checkmate.
And I panic. I panic. I look at this and I just say, there's no way for me to prevent this pawn from becoming a queen. I am screwed. And so I do this and my victory goes out the window. That forces a draw after this.
But what could you have done?
But what could I have done? Pause the video if you haven't watched our first video and ask yourself, in this position, how do I prevent this pawn from moving forward? All right. If you paused your video, hopefully you figured it out. Right there.
You can pin it.
Yeah, that pawn can't move forward because of the pin. So what options does black have at this point? Well, if black wants to protect this pawn, got to go here or here. Nothing else, everything else loses the pawn. That is real bad because after this move, black is just going to lose. Black is going to lose the pawn. They're going to lose the game. So that's probably the most viable move at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
uh, from this position, I'll make sure I'm getting this right. Separate him or force him in front. Because here, again, if he wants to protect that pawn, now there's only one spot he can move to protect the pawn.
Yep.
And that's in front of the pawn. And then after I go there, that's checkmate. He's got one move.
And all you have to do is watch to make sure the king has an escape square so you don't get a stalemate.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's our game, guys. I mean, like, even what we've discussed shows that we really have a way better grasp of the game, both, opening, mid, and end game than we did, when we first started this channel. I mean, it's very clear that that some of the stuff we had, like Tom said, some of the stuff we did in the game was pretty good. Like, it was pretty solid. But then other things, it was either wasting time or missing some obvious thing, or just really demonstrating that we didn't know some of the foundational principles that we needed to. But that's why we did this, because we wanted to improve, and we've definitely gotten our goal. And some of you guys that have been watching have improved as well, and have actually given us comments on as such. So, Tom, shall we open this up briefly to just kind of go over some of the principles? Maybe we could start with opening, since opening is obviously when the game begins. Just some of the concepts. Now, you mentioned taking toward the center and having two pawns in the center. You want to touch on that real quick?
Yeah. So, I mean, just the idea of capturing towards the center. You want two pawns in the center. This sort of thing makes for this really dynamic and game. But in terms of a quiet, more traditional chess opening, I mean, even the reason why this is the common response here is the idea of you're trying to maintain control of the center of the board, and you want to get these two pawns in the center of the board in a way that they can be protected.
You want me to go over it? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So then, in addition to that, this brings me to one of the reasons why let's use the Sicilian as an example. One of the reasons, just simple reason why this is so common. So, white would like to have a pawn duo in the center. I mean, that's kind of like traditional, like what you want to go for. But now, if this happens, well, aside from the fact that the queen is now vulnerable, now look, black has two pawns in the center. Well, not in the center yet, but central pawns. And then white only has one. So that's like a permanent potential disadvantage for white, because of giving up one of those two central pawns. So the idea here is that, so now if white, the idea here is this kind of thing, if this happened and then white goes here, well, and black does something like this, well then, okay, this is a little different, because if that you have, like, white has a lot of space and also a sort of attack going, like, there are exceptions to, just like the English language, of which there are many exceptions.
Well, I think like this, I think this is a good, because I hate playing this game. Like, the reason why I've started playing the Ready is almost entirely to avoid this game. So that I have played this game so many times. And it's actually precisely because I've lost that center pawn that I really don't like this. Now, Luke's typically in the response to this game, this capture doesn't happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this knight becomes problematic, something like that, right? And you're bouncing this knight around. And that's what I don't like, because now he does have those two pawns in the middle of the board, and I only have the one, and that's a disadvantage that I don't like playing with, which is why I prefer to go with something like this now, and this is very common for me to play, getting something like this, and everybody has central pawns, right? Like I said, they're protecting each other. They're not in the middle of the board, but they're central pawns, right? Those are good positions for those pawns. My pawn structure really solid. They're all defending each other.
Yep. And it's funny, Tom and it's actually, you couldn't have made this up if you tried. Like, it is so perfect that Tom and I have been in this journey together because Tom historically has been really tactical of a player. Like, you've preferred really open lines with lots of tactics and dynamic play. I've been the opposite. I've historically preferred, and I still do, each of us still have our preference, where I like it to the board to be locked up, solid play, and just kind of positional maneuvers without any crazy stuff. Um, Interestingly enough, what Tom is showing you here is a positional opening, because this right here with the queen, we call this a queen pawn opening. He didn't start with that queen pawn. However, that's what it became after he had started with the ready. So it could have gone into a e4, e5 game with this, but because it went to this, he's perfectly happy with that, which am I right in saying that historically you would not have been happy with this?
Yeah, I think historically I would not have been happy with this. You know, some of the things that I had that were big problems with positional games were problems with like my bishop. So and that's things that I have really worked to solve, and I've come to see how I can handle it, right? And that's the reason why I like this the London system.
And you
Sorry.
guys, the London system is where the bishop is out here, and then typically this pawn will move up, so then your pawn structure looks like this.
Yeah.
Um,
And part of the reason why I've really liked this is because I think in the past when I was thinking, you know, these like really positional games, I'm really imagining in my head something like this, which I don't even know what this is, the Collet system. There you go.
yeah,
Um, uh, uh, and oftentimes this sort of thing ends up happening, and it blocks this dark square bishop in here, and I hated playing with that limited range on that. Um, but I've, you know, this is a way to get that bishop activated before I have before it's locked in there, right? And I can still have that more dynamic play with those minor pieces in the center of the board,
yeah.
without you know locking everything in. And I mean, because I like those sorts of games too. I mean, I do occasionally see this in response to my ready opening. And if I see that in response to, no, I don't see that in response to the ready. That'd be bad. I see this in response to the ready opening. And if I see this in response to the ready opening, yeehaw, this is what I love to see, because if I see that, then I get to go into this, which that's the response, and boom, now I got me my Scotch game. And
Yep.
I will say, at the level that I play at, I rarely get to play the Scotch, especially if I open with E4.
Yep.
Um,
And from my perspective, I also like that because I like playing queen pawn openings usually. And now if white plays the queen pawn, this is also really advantageous for white because white is the one that doesn't have a knight in front of his pawns. And so therefore now you can bring the C pawn in, and now you have more of a pawn majority that are in the fight from the very beginning. And Tom and I, if you watch one of our games on our channel, we did the Queen's Gambit declined. Tom had his knight here, and it was really hard. It is not easy to play as black if you're the one with the knight in front of your pawn. You'd like to get your C pawn to help, but you have to maneuver the knight away for it to do that. So as Tom mentioned, whether you go here with getting into like a Scotch game, or whether you go queen pawn and you start to do like a Queen's Gambit type thing, either way, it's great for white.
yeah. Yep. And those are the kind of things that you need to be looking for in the openings. I mean, I think you know I said those focus being on those two pawns, right? Those two pawns being in the middle. I guess to be fair, I think that was kind of my understanding prior to us really playing was okay. Like having two pawns in the center of the board is great. How to accomplish that is I think
Yes.
what's harder. And usually those two center pawns are really accomplished by getting an advantage. And I would say usually it's with your C pawn on both sides, right?
Yeah.
Because that tends to be the supportive pawn. It's usually not going to be the king side pawn just because the king side pawn is the weak pawn that tends to not to move. That's not to say like that's always the case. Like King's Gambit, it obviously does, and that's what's trying to get you that middle majority. Um, but a lot of what you're doing is trying to get this pawn up into the mix to somehow give you the ability to capture one of the center pawns of your opponents, so you can yourself gain that advantage.
Yeah.
Which I think is emblematic of why Luke likes the Queen's Gambit so much, because it seizes right up on that opportunity, right? Because if the capture happens, then you're going to be able to capture it back. And if it doesn't happen, then you are likely going to be able to capture and gain that majority. Now that's why I do something like this for my response, because again, what you're trying to do is maintain that 2 pawns in the middle. And how do you do that? You do that with your C pawns.
Yeah.
And that's why that knight move becomes so devastating, is because that knight move, when you're bringing that out, you're really sacrificing that opportunity to get that C pawn involved in that battle for the middle.
Absolutely. It's a lot harder to play. And yeah, so let's real quickly, let's just briefly touch on some challenging responses on openings that maybe got us into trouble before, but we kind of learned how to approach them now. One of those for me is if black responds with this. So I mentioned, Tom, I think I mentioned this to you a little few days ago, but this is called the old Benoni defense. And what happens here. So this is a real challenge, because let's focus on what we just talked about, taking toward the center. If white accepts this and just takes it to try to gain material, you just took away from the center. Now, instantly, move 2. Black has 2 central pawns, white has 1. That's a problem. And you might think, if you're a newer player, you might think, oh, but my queen's opened up. Well, yeah, your queen is opened up, but what's it going to stare at? A pawn. And it's going to be protected by another pawn. So what I decided is, I realized that after I looked up some YouTube videos, I read some stuff in books and things. This is what I'm always going to go for now. And grandmaster level games, if you even look at, which doesn't always trickle down to our level, but the point is, you'll see that most of the time they'll play this because it's a way stronger response. Because what does it do? It locks up this square for this knight, so the knight can't naturally hop in there. And it also, this square now, if Tom went here, then I could go here. If he takes with this pawn, well, now I take the queen. If he takes with this pawn, well, now that vulnerable spot, right, where the king has been exposed. So this move right here is, we're only on move 2, but it's already like super strong. And we've applied what these concepts and actually made it tangible.
Well, and the C pawn is never going to be able to capture one of your center pawns anymore.
Yep, exactly.
You've neutralized that threat.
Yeah. So, and white has more space. Now, the other concept too, that you always have to keep in mind at the same time as capturing toward the center and maintain that central majority, is you also don't want to overextend yourself. What does overextending mean? Well, it means that every time, so right now, when you start a chess game, these squares on your third to back rank, these are so they're protected by pawns, right? So all of them are overprotected by your pawns. The idea is, if I move, let's say he goes here, now all of a sudden, let's just move another one here. Okay, now there's something called a hole, right? So this square right here, never again in the rest of our game can any of my white pawns protect that square. It is forever a permanent hole. And so the idea here is that one of the things I've learned in the last year is I used to always overextend myself. I used to I'm like, oh man, I'm gaining space. So this is a perfect example. I go like this, and maybe I did finally learn about doing this better, but then I don't know what to do with it. And so then, something like this happens, and I go like this. And then, blacks, even though I have more space than black, at the same time, everything's more open for me. So if I don't know how to use that well, then all of a sudden, things are coming in here, and so overextending yourself, case in point, when you advance your pawns way out there in like, especially when they're on the row of your opponent's side of the board, you got to be careful to make sure that that move, that there's a good solid reason for it, and that that pawn's not just going to become bait. Because when you've made a lot of holes in this file or in this rank, then you're saying permanently you can plop a knight in there or whatever piece that may be, and then you'll never be able to kick it with your pawn, and your pawns are the only pieces that can't move backwards.
You know, on that, Luke, so I play the Caro-Kann, and
This is a really good example of overextending.
I win almost every single game that I play where white does this.
It's really hard. I don't actually play it yet because I'm not familiar with how the lines work well. It's really tricky.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting the knight out, and it's usually something like this, which seems okay. White has some development going here,
and more space than black.
Yep, black got rid of that tricky bishop though that was going to be locked in by this pawn, right? And now you get something like this. This is what happens in the Caro-Kann, and when this attack starts formulating, now you're starting to put pressure on this pawn, which again is defended, right? But it's this idea of extending. So we get into the defenses, but you can pile up so much.
It's so hard. And the French, same idea with the French.
Yeah, and you can get into a lot of trouble as black here, because as white here, because we see this, right? And so it's just one more piece that's bearing down onto this pawn.
I've had this happen so many times as white, and I hate it. It's so hard to deal with.
It's really hard for white. It is really, yes, exactly. This happens in the French. And this bishop here is locked in place, right? Because you want to say like, okay, well, I can get another bishop into the mix, but that's the problem. You can't do it. And so that bishop is left on guard duty. So that's just one more example of overextending the pawns.
And it also underscores another principle, and that is your pawn, typically your pawn chain, when your pawns are connected, it's pointing toward the direction you should be attacking. So, it's very natural when Tom is showing you guys how, this happens. And then if something, if he moves here, okay, now by moving that pawn there, he's signaling that these pawns are connected. And now it's natural for the next pawns to roll up the board, right? Because it's pointing in the direction of that pawn chain. That's a beginner principle that is really helpful. And so then if by the time like Tom was showing, now I know he moved his bishop out, but the point is at some point you get to this, well, okay, let's look at the options. If white just, tries to protect it more, well, then black could do this. That wouldn't be too advantageous, but then you just start,
that's not bad, actually.
It's actually not bad because now this is a backward pawn.
Yeah.
So again, but then let's say if white took it, well, then that's really bad too, because now if white takes it, then now this is an isolated pawn. Now it could eventually have this pawn go up here, but then first they'd have to remove the knight to get the pawn up there.
And what are you doing for your pawn chain? Something like this.
Yeah, I mean, that's horrible. I mean, unless you're going to castle queenside, which I guess if these pawns don't move, you might be able to get away with it, but probably not.
Especially with your knight there, like that's going to be hard to accomplish.
Yeah, so it's like it's super challenging to know what to do, and it's all because you're simply you're following these opening principles of letting your pawn chain point where you're attacking and continuing to put pressure on the saying we mentioned this before, Tom. A pawn chain pawn structure is only as good as its backmost pawn, right? So the idea is this pawn chain, let's say I had, let me show you this. So right here, okay, this pawn chain is only as strong as, oops, let me undo these, is this pawn, right? So if someone can attack that pawn and mount up pressure on it and take it, then these are falling, these other pawns are falling. So that's another concept too, which underscores why you want to be careful before you advance a pawn, to know why you're doing it and know that, okay, once you do that, it can never go back.
Well, and that is where the dynamic really starts to fall. I mean, I find that in a lot of my games is now, I'm messing with, an attack here, just trying to coax my opponent into doing something like this. Um, that doesn't lose them the game, right? Advancing that pawn up doesn't lose the game. Let's say they did it just to kick my knight. Let's say I had a knight land here or something like that, right? That doesn't lose them the game, but that's what I want. I want them to do that because as they do that, now I've created a weakness here. And
Yep.
that's the idea is I'm just trying to create perpetual weaknesses. I'm trying to increase the amount of weaknesses that my opponent has, because as we start to trade off material, as we move into the mid game and the end game, those kind of compile, and it makes it so you can really start to gain some advantage.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, like, yeah, when it comes to openings, we have a much more solid grasp now of how to approach them, and pawn structure is a huge element in that equation.
One for me that I don't see it very often, and I don't know. There are like pawn stormer sort of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who do these weird things like on the side of the board, and I always thought to myself, well, this looks ridiculous, right? And I should be able to do something about it, but there were many games where like I just couldn't, or maybe they do something like it's all this like slow pawn push,
Mm-hmm.
because I know I've seen stuff like, again, I'm just making this up, right? Something like this. What a terrible opening move this is. This is just awful as an opening move. But capitalizing it. Okay, well, basic principle. I want to get my pawns in the center of the board, right? So pawns in
Yeah.
the center of the board, and then they do something like this, right? And I honestly have seen games like this where it's just like, what is black doing, or what is white doing, right? But again, getting your pieces into the middle of the board, and so you just keep going, right? Um, and then they do something like this, and again, what the heck is white doing? But if you're just like going along with like, okay, well, I'm gonna bring stuff out and whatever else, like I'm gonna start developing pieces. Oftentimes you get people who do these like weird pawn moves, and they start bullying your minor pieces with their
Yep.
pawns. And then it becomes really problematic for you. And you're like, how did I lose this game? Because they were making all these stupid moves at the beginning of the game. Well, it's
Yeah.
because they were utilizing their pawns. But that's why you want to utilize your pawns too, right? If they're
Yep.
giving up all this space, you take that space and say, okay, I am more than happy to play this stupid pawn game and trade off these pawns, because I'm going to have more. They're going to be in the center, and they're going to be in your territory, not mine.
Yep.
And that's and only then. I mean, if I can play a game where I get these three pawns out and
I was
all
gonna
three of
mention
those
that.
pawns out
Yep. I
every
was going to
time.
mention that, whether I'm white or whether I'm black. This is why I like the Queen's Gambit a lot too.
Yeah.
Whether I'm white or black, if you get your C, D, and E pawns in the center early on together, fantastic. The reason why we don't say the F pawn is because the F pawn is in front of, if you move that, like Tom mentioned, this first move of this weird game, if you move that, that is the weakest square on the entire board, is the square right in front of your king on the F file.
Well, I think that's kind of the thing that they're trying to coax here, right? They do something like this,
Mm-hmm.
and then you do something like this. They do something like this. I don't know what we're doing, but right. And then they're coaxing like, okay, well, I get this. And then it's like, okay, well, I just get to keep pushing these pawns kind of forward.
Right.
And they're just bullying your pieces all around. So
Mm-hmm.
the idea is like, no, let them do their weird development. You just take control of those key squares.
Yep. And then you use the pawns that don't create the weaknesses, those three, namely those three, as a good example.
Yep. And then then you can get your knight. You can get your knight out.
I mean, that is just fantastic. I would love to be black here.
Oh yeah, every day. This would be a great game for black.
Yeah.
So that's that was one of those things that always, kind of confused me, because it was like, my opponent isn't doing what my opponent is supposed to do, so what do I do?
Yeah. So yeah, we both have developed our opening repertoire a lot more, and I think in the future we might be doing some videos for you guys where we'll kind of go over some of the main openings we've looked into the most. I was gonna do the I was gonna do the Falkbeer counter gambit, which was our previous video last week. We I could have done that, but I liked and I said it in the video if you watch. I liked the King's Gambit accepted so much as black that I just totally revoked that idea. I mean, I'm not even gonna do that now. Like, so scrap that. I guess I'll have to choose something different.
Well, cool.
So
Do you want to call that good for what we've gone over this? We've
yeah,
done pretty extensive. I hope you guys have been following along with us. I hope you were able to look at this game and see some of these things that we've seen ourselves, just by progressing through your games and doing that study yourself. So yeah,
awesome.
it was cool to come back and revisit where we were.
Awesome. Thanks guys, and see you next time.
All right, bye.
Bye.